For me, I think it's never about there's something wrong about being successful as a Christian. I think for me, it's always been, why aren't I more successful? Right? Like, come on, God, I got you on my side.
Welcome back to another episode of The Blessed Entrepreneur. And today I have with me Stacey Brown Randall, and she is one of the leading authorities in the world right now on teaching businesses how to generate referrals without even asking. And her content is fantastic. And our main business, Cairo Candy, we have some pretty cool referral systems set up. And when I first heard her speak, I was kind of thinking, oh, we kind of got this in the bag, until she started laying out some very simple things you can do. And it was just very, very impressive. But I'm excited to have her on today, and we're going to kind of dive into her faith and her entrepreneurial story. Stacey, thanks for joining.
Oh, Billy, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So when did you first know you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
Pretty early on. I actually come from a family of entrepreneurs. So you're actually the weird one at our Thanksgiving table if you have a W-2. Because everybody in our family was mostly entrepreneurs, but I call them the crazy kind, and I can do that because they're my family. But they all seem to own restaurants or were in the hospitality business. And my father was an author, so a little bit different than the rest of my mom's, in particular my mom's side of the family. But yeah, so for me, I loved the idea of being in charge. I was kind of a bossy child to begin with. I think they try not to call girls bossy nowadays. I was straight up bossy. There was definitely probably business ownership in my future. But yeah, from an early age, I never knew what I wanted to do. Like that totally came later and after a few starts to get it figured out. But I definitely always knew, yeah, I'm going to be a business owner. I'm going to be in charge. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. But that's because that's a lot of what my family modeled for me. I just knew I would never own a restaurant until I married a man that wanted to own a restaurant. And then I just couldn't get away from that world. But yeah, so I think for me, it's kind of always been there.
What about your faith journey? Did you guys, was it something that was just a part of your childhood or?
So it was, I feel like my faith journey is that typical journey you hear about where you go to church. There is belief in God. There is belief like in being a Christian. That there is, my parents were Christians. They believed, and you went to church. And then as my mom started working more and more in my grandmother's restaurant, because at one point my grandmother had 5 restaurants, my mom was like, I'm not going to church anymore. I work Saturday nights, and so I'm sleeping in on Sundays. But my dad would continue to take my brother and I. But it wasn't ever like, I definitely always knew I was a Christian and I believed in God, but I didn't have a walk. Like I didn't have a relationship. I didn't have there wasn't ever, I think when I was growing up, conversations around the dinner table about faith and about like life and like seeing God play out in your life and things like that. I mean, at one point I feel like we moved churches based on which basketball team my brother was playing for at that time. So I grew up in as Episcopalian, and then I definitely ended up going to some Baptist churches because that's where my brother played basketball. Like it was like we were there. But my parents, I think personally, as a parent now of 3 kids that are teenagers and preteens, I think my parents kind of made a fatal mistake. When we turned 13, they gave us, my brother's older than me, they gave us each the option to go to church or not. Like, you're 13, you can make that decision. I do not think that is a decision you can make at 13. Right. And my brother was like, I'm going to sleep in, peace out. Like, I got to go play Super Mario Brothers in the morning on Sundays. And I kept going, but more so because that's how I played basketball and things like that. And then I went off to college, and it was like, didn't really go to church from that point forward, didn't really participate in Young Life in high school. or any of those kind of things that they have. But when I graduated from college and I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I still am, and I started working or whatever, I worked with a few people that were really strong Christians. And one in particular, she and I were like, we need to go back to church. Like, we need to get back to church. So it was really in my early 20s that I actually started like feeling like being called back to go to church. And when my husband and I met, because I met him in my early 20s as well, he was kind of on the same path. It was kind of like, he was like, yep, I need this too. Like, he had been kind of raised the same way I had been raised, but like had moved away from faith, not because some big dramatic thing happened, just because it just wasn't convenient necessarily to be going to church and stuff. And so when we started dating, like, the faith became kind of a drawing point for he and I. We were kind of on that faith journey. I was on that faith journey. And we kind of started, like, I guess, getting back to actually not just going to church, but, you know, being in Bible studies. And we did some things when we were an engaged couple, went through a Bible study. We've gone through Bible studies separately. He's in 2 men's groups still to this day. He's been in for like 10 or 15 years. And I think it really just kind of, we were just there together, kind of going back to that journey. So he's almost a decade older than me. So for me, it was my 20s, and for him, it was his 30s. But I think that was a big part of our relationship as well, when we were dating and engaged and then married as well.
Did you ever feel there was a resistance towards being successful because of your faith? Does that
No,
make sense?
It totally makes sense. Kind of the opposite for me. So early on, like in my 20s, like even before I started a business, I can't remember who was like the little online Bible study thing that I was like watching, like the stuff that I was watching. If you said her name, she's like very, very well known. I'm just totally drawing a blank on who it is. Yes, there you go. Perfect. I knew you'd figure it out. Like, super popular, right? Super big. She said something about, and I heard it. And there are things in my life where I will hear things and they will have a lasting impact. I think most people are that way, but because I'm a consumer of information and a consumer, I love to read. There are things like, lots of things will like impact me, and I can point to them later on as like that happened. I just remember she was doing like one of the TV specials, videos, I don't know, that I was watching. And she said something about there's nothing wrong with like being successful as a Christian, right? Like those were not her words, but that's kind of what I took away from it.
Sure.
Yeah. That's what I was like, oh, and I remember her saying something like, if you want somebody, if you can afford someone to clean your house, like that's okay. Like, I just remember that being one of her examples. And I was like,
giving you
okay.
Permission.
Right. The permission thing. For me, I think it's never about there's something wrong about being successful as a Christian. I think for me, it's always been, why aren't I more successful? Right? Like, come on, God, I got you on my side. And I think that has been a journey that he has just been like, okay, we're just going to break this apart and break this down so I can put it back together and you can understand like what I ultimately want from you, and what I ultimately have designed for your life. So for me, I would say, over the last, I don't know, number of years, it's been more about, okay, so if this is what it's meant to look like and this is what it's going to be, right? Am I following the path? And am I trying to self-source, or am I letting him source everything that's actually happening and turning it over to him? And that's kind of really been my journey, I would say, over the last number of years with my faith. So never felt guilty or bad about, hey, you can't have a profitable business or you can't be successful. Kind of the opposite of like, okay, well, I would like to be more successful then.
Yeah, that's really good, because there's so many of us. We have this issue with, you know, we want to be successful, but not too successful, because we're going to be judged by our peers. You know, and I think that's just like part of the church. And some people have heard me talk about this before. We were in a church, and I was meeting with the pastor one time, and he said, Billy, I think you're just too focused on money. And I left the conversation, and I was like, God, that's not my heart. I mean, you know, I want to do well. I want to grow my business and stuff. And I mean, I felt the Holy Spirit say, you keep doing what you're doing. That's the filter he's been raised with. I'm working on him, you know. But we see it, you know, all the time. It's get judgy. You know, look at the money they spent on that house. Do you know what they could have done with that money? Well, you don't know all the good I do with my money. um, talking about different things that you hear that leave a lasting impact on you. I remember sitting at a church service one time, all the time, but one in particular, that have you ever been in a service and the preacher's saying one thing, and it's not that you're not paying attention, but it's like the Holy Spirit is like pointing out and highlighting all these other things too about the story.
Yes.
And it was the widow woman who went to Elijah. It's like, hey, they're going to take my kids into slavery if I don't pay this debt. What do I do? And he's like, what do you have? I've got the oil. Go borrow all these vessels. Start pouring the oil into the vessels, blah, blah, blah. And at the very end, she's like, okay, now what? And he's like, go take the oil, sell it for a profit. Okay, it's okay to make a profit. Go sell it for a profit. Pay your debts, right? Meet your obligations. And then you and your sons live on the rest. And I remember it's like God highlighted that part. Go enjoy the rest, as long as you're meeting all your obligations and stuff first. And I think one of the problems is people try to go live on the rest and they haven't met all their obligations, right? They haven't done the things that they should be doing, to begin with. What about your family? Do you see entrepreneurship as something that your kids are probably going to be involved with, or?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I always wonder. So we have three. So our youngest is our daughter. She's 12. So middle school drama, all that is our lives right now with her. Then our son, Jacob, is in 9th grade. He's 14. And then we have custody of our nephew, Danny, who is 15, but also in 9th grade. So the boys are 10 months apart.
Oh, wow.
And Danny has been with us since he was 7.5. So it'll be 8 years, I believe, this summer of 23. And that's probably been, I would say, taking in a child that is not ours and knowing the trauma of what he experienced growing up before we took him in, and then trying to do our best to raise him. That, I think that has probably been the most significant and deciding factor of faith for my husband and I, just because you never know what that's going to be like until you start on that journey, and then you start living it, and you never realize how much you're going to need Jesus through that process. So I don't know about my kids with entrepreneurship. I know that we talk about it, and so my husband owned a restaurant for 15 years. After that, because the restaurant wasn't enough, then he decided he needed a food truck, which eventually turned into a food and beverage management company. And so the kids were, around that when they were little. Of course, all that started before they were around, but then he sold the restaurant in 2018 and then sold the food truck and food and beverage management company in 2022. So, and he's been working like in a corporate job for the last couple of years. So they've seen both for us, right? They know mom had a business failure, and then she ended up in that office working for a while that had all the glass windows. That's like all they remember when they were little. And then mom got another business, and then she had a different office, and dad used to own a restaurant, and now he sits in a cubicle. And so they've kind of seen everything, and we talk openly about it. And we talk about, so my daughter, when she was younger, she used to talk about, I want to be a hairdresser. I'm like, awesome. You be the best hairdresser you can be, but you're also going to own the salon. And so that's just kind of been a messaging I think that we are a little intentional about, because we love the idea of our kids being entrepreneurs. We also think if one of them wants to be a pastor, that's going to be amazing too, or a teacher, or whatever they want to do. The truth is, whatever they decide to do now, they won't be doing in probably their 20s or 30s or 40s, and it'll change a lot. But yeah, we talk about entrepreneurship. We talk about the highs and the lows that come with it, and what it looks like. Obviously with what's appropriate based on their age. But it'll be interesting to see. I do remember my daughter Mackenzie probably a couple months ago had said to me, so I may take over your business one day. And I was like, you don't even know what I do, except for she knows when I'm on a Zoom call because the light's on, and she knows not to come into the office. I'm like, then she packages things for me, right? She packages up the stuff we send to our clients and stuff like that I send to my referral sources and stuff. And she's like, yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to own your business one day. And I was like, but you don't even know what I do. She's like, yeah, but it gives you some freedom, and I'm sure I can figure it out. But I won't do it until I'm done being an actress first, and then maybe an interior designer, and then maybe I'll take over your business. And I was like, okay, honey, do
And
all
off
the
you go.
things, right? Do all the things you want to do. That's amazing. We'll see if the business is still here for you when you get done being an actress and then an interior designer.
That's great. You've brought it up a couple of times, so if you don't mind, I want to dig in a little bit. Let's talk about the business failure. What was that?
Yeah, so knowing that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but trying to figure out what that would look like. When I was working in one of the jobs that I had, I was working for the Chamber of Commerce here in Charlotte, and I kind of fell into employee engagement and generational diversity. And it just kind of became like this side hustle for me of like just being very interested in understanding how the generations work at work. And probably because I didn't have great bosses and trying to figure out, is it me? Pretty sure it's not. It's got to be them. Like, what is it? And so I started having conversations with people just about the generational diversity thing. And there was a small company that was a research firm that said, hey, why don't you come on board with us and be a third partner? It was a husband and wife team. And they said, be a third partner and like build out and develop out our generational diversity arm of this business. Because I had done some work with them at the chamber. I think that's how I met them or whatever. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I'm going to do that. And I was 4 weeks pregnant and didn't know it. Not the best time to decide to like, so I've never had a maternity leave. I feel like I missed out on a rite of passage with both my kids because I was an entrepreneur with having both of them. So they were like, you should come on board. And I was like, okay, cool. So I left the job. I wasn't happy anyways. I left the company. I started doing this consulting and generational diversity. I landed a really big client that was totally like a massive gift from God because I probably had no business landing that client, but I knew my stuff. And started working with them. And that client said to me, hey, you're really good at this and you probably should run your own business. If you start it, we'll be your first client. It's like the dream way to start a business. Like nobody
Right.
starts a business with a 6-figure contract. Like, come on, like that's not how it works. But that's how it started for me. And so I started that business. It was generational diversity, employee engagement, like an HR consulting firm. And they were my biggest client for almost 2 years until they weren't. And then I was like, oh, snap. I've got to figure out like all the other things about growing a business that I haven't had to figure out because I just had this great contract.
Right.
And so I started adding clients and growing, but I never really figured out that business development piece that is so very critical to having a pipeline full of potential clients so that when one contract is done, or one like project is done, you look up and you're like, oh yeah, and here's more clients. For me, it was the roller coaster, feast or famine. It was like, I got a client, I put my head down, I did the work, I looked up and I was like, oh, now I got to go hustle and now I got to go network, got to go bring in more clients. And so I was always networking. I was constantly hustling, which is kind of exhausting when you have small children as well. And it was always on that cycle. It was like 4 years. Somewhere in my 4th year, it was still in that cycle of like, oh my gosh, there's nothing consistent about this business. There's no way, there's nothing I have that I can scale with this business. And so I got really burnt out. And at the same time, the business wasn't doing well. And it wasn't like providing income into the family. And we've always been a 2-income family. And so I was like, I got to get a job. And my husband's super supportive. And so he's like, no, you don't. He was like, we'll figure it out. I'm like, no, I need to go get a job. And so it was somewhere after the 4-year mark, I made the decision to take down my shingle and be like, okay, now I'm also a member of the Business Failure Club. And I went back to corporate America. But the minute my heels hit that marble floor on the lobby of my interviews, working, like going through the interview process, trying to get a job, I kept thinking, what's my exit strategy? Like, I'm not supposed to be here long term. Right. I don't play well in a corporate sandbox. I'm slightly too opinionated. And I can't stand favoritism. And so there's just a few things for me that I don't always work well in that business kind of environment. And so I knew I needed, the right company, I think I probably would have been fine at and just never found that. So for me, it was like, okay, I need to go back out. And even though what's interesting is that I wasn't happy at that company, the company was run by a really strong Christian man who was the CEO, and he was like, it was a great boss. It was a good people. I didn't enjoy what I was doing, and I didn't like just all the politics that go along, no matter how great the company is. And so I was like, I got to get out of here. And I kept looking for an escape route. And then finally I had somebody come to me and they were like, hey, you should get certified as a productivity coach. And it was somebody that I had gone through one of her productivity boot camps, like back in like 2009, like just after having my first son. And she was like, you were great at it. She was like, and then you did it and you've been really successful with it. And so you should become certified in it. And I was like, okay. So I became certified in it. And then that became the escape route. That became the exit strategy to build a coaching practice, which I did. And then that coaching practice eventually grew because of referrals. And then people started saying, okay, now you're growing so much. How are you growing so much? I'm like, oh, I have this referral strategy. And they're like, thanks for teaching us how to like tame our inbox, but we'd rather learn your referral strategy. And then the whole business just shifted and started doing the referral piece. Yeah. It's almost 10 years now. So yeah, it was definitely, yeah.
I want to back up just a little bit. On the taking your shingle down, did that ever, I don't know if questioned your faith? How did that affect your faith? Or did it?
So,
was there a mindset of, all right, God, where were you?
No.
Used you. Yeah. Okay.
I because of where I was with my faith. For me, the Stacey of today that sees God intertwined in like every step I take and everything I do, and has been working to stop self-sourcing everything and white knuckling everything and really allowing God to be a part of, like, to be the CEO of my business and to make the decisions. The Stacey of today, that was not the Stacey back then. And so it was almost as if there was a separation of church and state, right? It was almost as if the business was mine and faith was everything else. And so if there's one thing I'm really good at, I mean, I'd like to think God has made me good at a number of things, but if there's one thing I'm really good at, it is clearly identifying what went wrong and where I went wrong. And in some cases, probably too critical of myself. So back then it was really, okay, I failed. Like, this was on me. Like, I didn't do what I needed to do. Things didn't work out. I don't remember having like questioning my faith or a crisis of faith of kind of going through that process. I do know it like certainly brought me back to my faith a little bit more. Like, okay, what's happening? Where'd you go, God? Sorry. Oops, it was me. I moved. You didn't move away, right? Like, let me get back. And so if anything, it kind of helped reconfirm my faith moving forward. But it would still take years before I really got to the point where I'm like, okay, no, I want like a daily walk with him. And that is different than anything that I probably had earlier in my life.
I love how this business didn't start off doing what you're doing, right? It kind of morphed. I teach a life group at our church, ironically called Blessed Entrepreneur. And we were talking about this last night, that, it's the steps of the righteous that are ordered, not the leaps, not the huge jumps, because we don't know. When I started Chiro Candy, it was a podcast for chiropractors. It was a marketing podcast for chiropractors. I used to work in office for a chiropractor. I did all the marketing. We had multiple locations. And so I just wanted to give value. I had no idea how we were going to start generating an income. And a very similar thing is like we just started serving and giving out good content, and then people just started asking, "Hey, will you help us do this? Will you help us do that?" And then it turned into an ad agency. We had an agency. I didn't even know it was an agency. If that makes sense. Like, we have an agency. I was like, "Oh, hey, what's an agent?" Oh, well, I guess I do.
I guess I do have one.
A marketing agency. Yeah. So you don't know, and I think it's good to. That's very common just in our walk with God anyway, right? We don't always know. If he was to show us where we're going to be 5 years from now, I don't think we'd believe it. Right. And for a couple of reasons. One, in that journey, it's not just about growing our faith, but it's also about who we become along the way. Because there's no way that Billy from, 2015 could manage the company that we have today, because I wasn't that person yet. Right. And so part of that, I also refer to as like driving in the fog. he shows us a little bit, and when you get there, he shows a little bit more, a little bit more. It's us becoming that person that can do the thing, that can have the thing, and but so sometimes people do get caught up on, no, this is what my business is going to be. And then yet the marketplace is saying, yeah, but what if you did this? We'd really like you to teach us this or help us with this. Nope, I don't do that. This is what I do. And you could really be missing out on a lot of opportunity. And that could be wisdom, right? That could be God saying, I'm trying to show you something here.
Yeah, I think sometimes figuring out and discerning, wait, is that where I'm headed? Is that where you want me to go, God? Versus, or am I just listening to my desires of the flesh, right? And that's the direction I want to go in. I think that is a part as we're kind of ever evolving. There's an author that I listen to, Kim Avery, with her book is like Prayer Powered Entrepreneur, I think is the name of her book. But one of her favorite sayings is that God's favorite way to grow our business is by growing us. And when you really hear it, I think in that way, it's like, oh, right. Yep. I'm probably going to have to become a different version of who I am today for the business to get any different or to look any different or to grow or to whatever it's supposed to do. It doesn't always have to grow. I think that's something I'm always battling. Is like, if it's not growing, it's dying. No, that's actually not true. Yeah. It is true, I think, in societal terms, right? And how the business community would judge you, but I don't necessarily think that's how it is within God's terms. And so, but yeah, I think I look at, like, sometimes I'll catch myself behaving like in a situation and I'll be like, whoa, like, and like handling something well. Let me just preface this by saying, like, having something happen and then, right, and like extending grace to that person and be like, hey, let's just fix it. Like, I get it. Like, this may be terrible for me, but like, let's just fix it. Like, and extending grace and being calm. And I'm like, I'm so glad they're not dealing with 27 or 35-year-old Stacey, because there is absolutely no way that's how I would have responded. I would have like been crazy and they would have like felt the wrath and it would have been very, very damaging probably. And so like, it is interesting, like how we, if we allow it, right, how we evolve, how we change, how we grow with like, letting God take the lead. It's just, but let's be honest, Billy, it's kind of annoying. He's like, here's the little piece I'm going to show you, not the next 14 steps. And I like to know where I'm going. And so for me, I sometimes battle that a little bit too. But, you know, a lot of times, like my husband and I will have conversations about like where the business is and what it could be doing. And, you know, those kind of conversations. It's like, yep. And like the business has the potential to retire him one day, right? If that's what he ultimately ends up wanting to do. And I always keep saying, I'm like, but I keep hitting this, like this place, like this ceiling, for lack of a better term. Like I keep hitting this ceiling or whatever. And sometimes it takes him reminding me. He was like, yeah, but you keep hitting that ceiling. He goes, but you have plenty of time to be there with the kids and how they need you and how you want to show up as a mother and how it helps you not be a stressed out, crazy human dealing with our nephew. Right. And so sometimes I just have to remind myself that this business is what it is, and it's beautiful and it's fabulous and I love it. And I'm certainly helping a lot of people all around the world, and that's amazing. The flesh side of me, right, the societal side of me says, and it could be so much bigger and it could do so much more. And let's be frank, it can make so much more money. But the truth is that like when I'm done at the end of the day, like I don't carry a lot of stress from my business. I get to go in, and because what I learned early on with raising our nephew is that I can't leave work so stressed out that I'm already raw and on edge. Because when you walk in, and our nephew has a number of issues, like ADHD, PTSD, a number of things. He's had a very trauma-filled first 7 years of his life. When you walk in and you're already on edge, and then he's just being him, which is not like the easiest thing to always deal with, it just sets you off. And when I don't walk in raw, when I don't walk in exhausted, and I'm like, doo-doo-doo, had a great day, got like 7 things done, this is awesome, had a good couple calls with clients, everything runs better in that world. And I think that is exactly what God wants, at least maybe until these kids eventually get out of the house. I don't know. He hasn't told me the whole part of the plan, but that's kind of where I see it.
That's a great point, because so often we think of the business success as the the bottom line? Well, it's also what the lifestyle the business provides. Being able to wake up when you're done sleeping, or like, however your day normally goes, and not having that stress, and being able to do those other things. One of the things we do with our coaching clients, and I even do this in our life group, is we'll have a session where we plan out your ideal day. Like, what time do you want to wake up? What does your morning look like? What's your morning routine? What do you do for the day? What's your ideal work, where you feel you're going to be the most productive? And you just kind of really map out this whole thing, and then make sure your business is going to be able to provide that lifestyle. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to climb this ladder of success, building your business, and realize the ladder's on the wrong wall. It's like, I've built
That's good.
a job, and it's providing the income, but it's not providing really what you really want. Because at the end of the day, it's not about that. It's about, we only have, on average, 17 summers with our kids, and they're gone.
Yep.
Right? I mean, they may be coming back every once in a while, but our goal is to raise good adults, not good kids. And they need us during that time. They need that. So being able to have a job or a business that gives you the flexibility to be there, that's part of the benefit of that business, not just the bottom line. So I liked your husband's kind of point in that, that it does give you all that.
Yeah, I think he likes me better too, right? It's easier to be married to me. And it's interesting, like, my business has made a massive, like, fundamental model shift over the last 2 years. And it's interesting. I've told my husband, I was like, now some days I'm actually bored. And he was like, are you kidding me? He was like, what? He was like, because the way I used to grow my business, and part of my business is online, right? It's evolved. Like, I think if I mapped it out, it's an interesting kind of like a Jeremy Bearimy, if you've ever watched The Good Place, like the squiggly lines or whatever of like what my model has looked like. But, I used to do a lot of live launches because a lot of my business is online, or I had online courses. Now I still do, but I don't focus on them as much as the coaching that goes around those training programs, those online programs. And so, but I remember being in launch mode, and Norm was like, I just wish the kids and I could like leave the house when you were in launch mode, because you're like running around like crazy. Something always goes wrong, because basically I hate technology and my business pretty much runs on it 100%. And it was like, you're stressed, you're like crazy, you're like snapping at us. And it's true. He was like, and there were all these years where like, that's kind of how I was like evolving this business. And but I see all the things I've learned and all the ways that I've grown. But if I didn't go through some of those things, and maybe I went through them longer than was really originally the plan to get where I am today, to be like, oh, right, I can make the same amount of money. Which, would I want more? Of course. But I could make the same amount of money and have a much different schedule, where on some days I'm actually like, I'm going to go for a second walk because I'm kind of bored, than to being able to not be the opposite of that, and recognizing that that's the beautiful life. That, yes, my business may never make $1 million a year, but it's also not trying so hard to make $100,000, right? Like, it's not that either. Like, it makes good money, and it's providing the beautiful life that allows me to be unhurried, particularly in this final couple seasons that I really have, or couple years I have with the boys, and then also with my daughter. And it's just, it takes, and I don't know if I'm 100% there, because it definitely takes a long time to get comfortable with that. Like, oh, this is the beautiful kind of small life that's very unhurried that I am living. And that is beautiful. And that is okay. And like, that's what I want.
Right.
And I'm still working through like, yep, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I want. This is what it's supposed to look like. Whatever God has planned for me, I don't have to know what it looks like. I don't know what it'll look like later. But really finding peace in that place has kind of been probably the journey I would say that God has me on right now.
That is a great place to be. Whenever we were scaling our business, and I was putting team members in place to do the things that I didn't want to do. And, fortunately our model, I'm able to do that. And there are days I'm like, okay, what's on the agenda for today? Not a lot. What am I going to do? Let's go. I'll go do some videos. It's like, sometimes I'm like, I need some stuff to do. And I have to keep like an Asana task list of things that I need to get done. They're not pressing, but in my spare time, I need to get these things done. But that is kind of a refreshing place to be at, where every day is not, stressed, and, there is the good Stacey, after hours for the family. So, what's the goal over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think it's more of the same. I mean, unless God shows me something different or something changes, there's definitely things that have been percolating in the business that has the potential for the business to look different. But I've been really, really intentional about the growth trajectory and doing it how I can manage it. I have a coaching program, and I brought that on kind of towards the end of 2021, and it is my happy place. Like, having the ability to help people go deep and to really be able to focus on what I'm teaching them, and then kind of hold them accountable and be available to them on an ongoing basis. I'm loving it. I'm loving the model. I'm loving how it works and what it looks like. Getting it to capacity would actually be, it's only a 12-month thing. So it's a continual place of getting it so it's always at capacity. I think that's kind of where I am right now. There are always, like I said, things percolating that may shift and change that. But I don't know. We'll see. I mean, right now I got 3.5 years left with my boys. We're doing a big trip to Alaska this year, and it kind of set me on this place of, I want to do a big trip like that every year for the next couple of summers while I have them. And then I've got 2 years after that with my daughter. So, I mean, eventually I hope that, Billy, we get to have a conversation, and I am living in my tiny house nation up in the mountains somewhere, and I've launched these 3 fabulous children into the world, and they know that their Heavenly Father loves them and their earthly parents love them, and they're off doing their thing, and I'm living the tiny life, in the mountains somewhere. But that's not yet. That's still in the future.
Yeah, and then there's a chance you get there, and then you're like, talking about
bored.
Being bored now. You're like, okay, I miss people. So,
yes.
All right. Well, if you're interested in reaching out to Stacey, I definitely recommend, if you have any kind of business that you could use referrals, you've got to go check out her website. It's Stacey Brown Randall, Stacey with an E, Stacey Brown Randall. And she has some great resources on there. She has, you do have courses, right? And then you also have your coaching program. But what's great is, this is one of the things we teach too. I mean, not on the scale that you do. Like, you shouldn't be looking for your ideal clients. You should be looking for your ideal referral sources. Because, sometimes it's just a few different businesses or people you can build relationships with that really just turns on the faucet for your business, that allows you that steady stream of consistent growth. And there's nobody I met that's better at referrals than Stacey. So thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you for having me.
If you haven't already done so, make sure you go to blessedentrepreneur.com/book to get a free copy of my brand new book, The Blessed Entrepreneur. I broke this down into 2 sections. The first half of the book is about mindset. And what is it the Bible actually says about us being blessed to be a blessing? I've got a background in ministry, and we have a much larger impact on the kingdom now than we did whenever I was in full-time ministry because of our finances. We're able to support missions and ministries on a level that I never even thought possible. I'm not saying everybody's supposed to be wealthy, but if you're here, there's a good chance that you feel some type of calling to entrepreneurship or business. So let's look and see what the Bible actually says about that. The second half of the book is I break down the 5-step process that I used to start a business from scratch. It was an idea, it was a thought that now does multiple 7 figures a year, and I only work 4 to 5 hours a week.
So not only does it allow us to support missions and ministries on a level I never thought possible, it's allowed us to live a lifestyle that I never thought possible. Go to blessedentrepreneur.com/book to pick up your copy today.